After a lot of trouble, we're finally back with the series. If the footage looks different in this video, that's because I've switched to using the DVD version for collecting footage, at least for this part, because unfortunately, my Blu-ray copy of this episode does not play properly, so that was a fun little surprise. So yeah, between copyright issues and having to buy an entirely separate DVD for this thing, it's been a real pain making this video. Not that that has anything to do with this video at all, I just wanted to rant about that. Also, you may have already noticed, but this video is way shorter than the other ones in this series so far because I'm only talking about one episode in this video. It sucks, but for the sake of not going insane and canceling the video over and over again, that's what I've decided to do. Anyways, episode 21, The Red Glow. Let's get the two big elephants out of the way. The two things that this episode absolutely got right: the aftermath of the Slicer fight and everything to do with Shao Tucker. What happens after the Slicer fight is something that a lot of people talked about in the comment section of my last video, and for good reason. It's haunting, and it leaves some dark implications about Al's whole bodily situation, especially with the whole mindfuck thing the anime was doing with him in the last episode. And it also showcases one of Ed's biggest problems throughout the entire series. Although he acts with only the best intentions in mind a lot of times, he is ultimately still a kid, an immature kid who doesn't really think about the full scope of things and some of the lasting ramifications his words and actions have on people. And in this situation where he kind of naively tells the Slicer brothers that they're still human, it makes them yearn for something that's not possible, and because they have no hope of attaining the life they now want after being treated like a human being for the first time in years probably, they decide it's better to just give up. And even though up until this point we've only known these guys as a force of opposition, I have no problem finding this to be a compelling little scene because the show smartly makes it more about Ed than anything. He can't help but relate to these guys, and how they end up commenting on what Ed did to Al at the beginning of the show is enough to really rattle him, and that's really fucked up, while showing that Ed isn't perfect, that sometimes he won't say the exact right thing in every situation, and like in Marco's case, trying to bring back his mother, and with the whole Nina incident, he's completely powerless in this scenario as well. There's nothing he can do, and that's something that the show decides to remind him of again in this episode. Tucker shows up, but this time as a chimera, and I gotta say, I love the way he's always whispering in this show. That combined with his very not trying too hard to be creepy, but is still really creepy design does wonders in setting the right atmosphere around him. While he's not an outright malicious force, he's still unnerving, and the show plays with that interesting contrast well with his presentation. But I'm getting sidetracked. The point is, this show just can't help reminding Ed of the single biggest fuck up that he's been a part of since the beginning of his journey. The moment that arguably defined him more than his own mother's human transmutation. I love this scene. The way it cuts from Ed's arm grabbing the curtain to the inside of the tank is really great. The way Nina's posed and the expression on her face is really unsettling, and holy shit, the way they draw Ed's face is so weighty, so poignant, and full of awesomeness. Okay, that's enough. I know I've said this so many times before, but it really bears repeating. Another subtle detail in this scene is that even though Ed is clearly disgusted by what Tucker is doing here when he first finds out about it, his tone and attitude in general changes when Tucker says this.
I tried and failed many times, and in the end I wound up in this form. But I'm almost there. Almost. You mean it's possible?
Like, not only is he willing to entertain the idea, but he's also clearly drawn in by it. He's enticed by this concept to the point where he completely glosses over something he finds morally reprehensible in order to further his own interests. Kind of like the celebrities that went to fucking Epstein's Island. I love the way this next scene plays out. Tucker slowly opens the door, the music crescendos as Ed gets a good look at what's inside, and then it pauses and starts up again as Ed runs inside, and it cuts between these two close-ups of him looking around frantically, and it's so great. It nails this feeling of Ed being overwhelmed by ambition and curiosity and his ego and just getting carried away in general. Specifically, this shot of Ed's reflection in the red liquid as his head turns when Tucker tempts him with the promise of the thing that he's been looking for this entire time, and the shot that follows as Ed looks forward and the camera slowly zooms out to reveal more and more of the room as he starts to grasp the full scope of what he can do and all the mistakes he could fix. They telegraph what Ed is thinking so well here, and you can practically see the gears turning in his head as the scene plays out and progresses more and more. And I mentioned this before, but Tucker's low whispering voice contributes a lot to the chilling nature of the scene and this feeling of self-importance too. He does such a good job of tempting Ed into going through with this that I can only applaud him, even going as far as to stroke his ego.
It's an impossible task for any ordinary alchemist. Yeah, you're right. But you see, I'm no ordinary alchemist.
Ed's such a cocky little shit, man, and I don't mean that as a criticism. It's one of the best aspects of his character, and it actually feels organic in the show. Like, I never got the sense that the Brotherhood version of Ed was really arrogant, and that part of his arc is maturing, and I don't think that necessarily needs to be the case for that version of the character, but it's just so frustrating when I hear people say those kinds of things about him when it doesn't seem to be backed up by anything other than that scene at the church of Ed being a cunt to Rose at the beginning of the show, and even then, I don't think that's really the best indicator or something like that. In fact, it seems out of character for that version of Ed to do something like that because he never acted like that ever again. In 2003, though, they place a much bigger focus on Ed's lack of control in a lot of situations and how much that bothers him. The whole shebang I explained with the Philosopher's Stone is here. There was an aspect of Shao Tucker that could be seen in Ed, which commented on the potential dangers of curiosity and the pursuit of knowledge. What the homunculi actually are in this version of the show, too, when that gets revealed, contributes a lot to the theme of the characters in general being egotistical. There feels like a much stronger focus is being placed on that element of Ed's character, while the show also explores and expands on his character in many other ways at the same time. There's always so much that goes on with Ed and his psyche and his thought process and how he processes information and reacts to certain things, but it's all balanced in a way that's planned, well thought out, and relates to each other very well, which is what makes the story more interesting to me than the standard, although still likable plot of the manga, and both are a hell of a lot more interesting than Brotherhood, which sucks. That final line Ed says as the episode comes to an end just fully sums up the state of his character at this point and reinforces an idea that Tucker brought up before. Ed is partly doing this for his brother, scratch that, he's mostly doing this for his brother. I don't think there's any doubt that that is the main motivation for his quest to find the Philosopher's Stone, but a tiny part of him that he doesn't want to acknowledge, wants to do it for the sake of satisfying his own curiosity, just for the sake of reveling in the fact that he could do it, that he was the first to do it. Kind of like me and my relationship with Brotherhood, you know? Like, for the most part, I want to take down that show because it's genuinely boring and mediocre and doesn't deserve the praise that it gets, like, at all. And I think the world would be an objectively better place without it, but this tiny part of me just wants to do it for the much more selfish reason, just because I want the credit for taking that show down. Maybe I didn't pinpoint his motivation super precisely, but the point is there is another underlying motive he has for doing this, a much more selfish and less noble cause that even he might not be aware of. Anyways, that's all I wanted to talk about in this episode. Greed was introduced in this episode, and I like the scene he was in. His eye moves in a creepy way, and the red lighting looks really cool. It's a bit weird he was tied up with a couple of belts, though. What else? Alan Scar are also exploring Lab 5, but who cares? Honestly, this is a common trend with 2003, but usually the weakest aspects of the show relate to things that Al goes through during some of these episodes. Now, did I hate the parts of Alan Scar just kind of walking around and Scar's flashback to his brother who lost his fucking nutsack? No, I didn't. Like, there weren't any big problems with these parts of the show, but at the same time, I just couldn't help but feel incredibly bored by this. Maybe it's because Ed is such an interesting character and the things that he goes through is so much more interesting to the point where anything else will kind of feel like a time waster by default. I don't know, but something about these moments during this episode just fucking ate at my soul. I'm not gonna rag on it too much because it is a minor part of the episode, but just look at this hallway, for example, the one that Alan Scar are walking through right now. It's just so bland and lazy that just comparing it to the areas that Ed is exploring is kind of funny when you think about the sheer difference in quality and degree of effort that was put into each of these parts of the show, even excluding things like the room with the red glow, which looks fucking incredible. Just take a look at Tucker's lab, for instance. The floor looks nicer, there are notes pinned to the wall, the lighting is a little darker and moodier, the way Ed and Tucker are standing here contribute to the overall composition. There's this enigmatic curtain in the background that you can't help but look at, and then in comparison we get this on fucking Al's side of things. It's honestly sad how bland this part of the show looks in comparison to the genuinely great stuff that it has to offer. And again, that's a trend that the rest of the show follows, which is a huge shame, but we're getting a little off topic. Despite how boring one part of this episode is, I still like this episode a lot, and I can't give it anything less than an 8 out of 10. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, despite the fact that I covered a lot less than I usually do, and I also hope it was enough to get people interested in this series again, because despite all the problems I had making this video, I just love talking about the show. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll be going now.